The night I turned 18, my father and uncle sat me down and told me to sign away my grandmother's cabin like it was just paperwork. What they didn't know was that 6 years earlier, my grandparents had already made me the only legal owner, and by the time they walked into the county office the next morning to sell it for over $500,000, I had already locked them out of everything they thought they owned. Chapter 1. The Night They Decided for Me. The night after my grandmother's funeral, the house felt too quiet for what had just happened. People had come and gone all afternoon. Neighbors, distant relatives, men in dark suits who spoke softly and stayed only long enough to shake hands and offer condolences that sounded rehearsed. By evening, it was just us again. My dad, my mom, my Uncle Ryan, my little brother Evan, and me. We sat around the kitchen table like we always did, but something about it felt off. No one reached for the extra chair that used to be pulled out when my grandparents visited. No one said her name. My mom cleared plates that were barely touched. My dad kept checking his phone. Ryan leaned back in his chair like he had already moved on. I stared at the table, at the faint scratches my grandfather had made years ago when he tried to fix a loose leg with the wrong tool. I used to trace those lines with my finger when I was younger. That night, I kept my hands in my lap. Ryan was the first to say it out loud. "We need to talk about the cabin." It landed heavier than it should have, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Flat, practical, like it was already decided. My dad nodded without looking at me. "It's the biggest asset. We can't just let it sit there." Asset? I felt something tighten in my chest. They had never called it that before. It had always been the cabin, Grandma's place, the lake house. Now it was an asset. My mom tried to soften it, her voice careful, almost gentle. "Your grandmother loved that place, Emily, but we have to be realistic. It's a lot to maintain. Taxes alone aren't—" Ryan cut her off. "We've already had interest. A developer out of Eugene. They're looking to buy up lakefront properties." I looked up at that. Interest. My dad finally met my eyes, but it wasn't the look I expected. There was no hesitation in it, no grief, just a kind of tired determination. "This isn't something we can put off, Em. We have to think long-term." Long-term for who? I didn't say it out loud. I could feel the words sitting there, but something held me back. Evan shifted in his seat, looking between all of us like he knew he was missing something important. "Are we selling it?" No one answered him right away. Ryan leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "We're exploring options." That wasn't an answer. My mom set a glass down a little too hard, then forced a smile at Evan. "We're just figuring things out." I kept watching them. The way Ryan spoke like he was already in charge. The way my dad didn't correct him. The way my mom filled in the gaps with soft words that didn't actually change anything. They had talked about this before tonight, without me. That realization didn't hit all at once. It came in pieces, in the way they didn't look at me when they said certain things, in the way Ryan used words like "we" without including me in what that meant. I was still staring at the table when Ryan said something that made me look up again. "Once we clean the title, it's a straightforward transfer." My dad gave him a look, quick and sharp, like he had said too much. Ryan shrugged. "I'm just saying, it's not complicated." Clean the title. The phrase didn't belong in a conversation about family. My dad stood up abruptly, grabbing his phone off the counter. "I need some air." Ryan followed him without another word. The back door opened, then closed. A second later, I heard the low murmur of their voices outside. My mom stayed in the kitchen, wiping the same spot on the counter over and over again. "You know your father is just trying to do what's best," she said, not looking at me. I didn't respond. She finally turned, her expression softer than her voice had been earlier. "You're still young. There are things you don't have to worry about yet." That was the moment it settled in. Not the words themselves, the way she said them, like it was already decided that I didn't get a say. I pushed my chair back quietly and stood up. "I'm going to my room." She nodded like that was the right answer. Upstairs, I closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed. For a while, I just listened. The house carried sound in strange ways at night. Pipes, footsteps, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, and underneath all of that, faint but steady, my dad and Ryan's voices outside. I stood up and moved to the window. It was cracked open just enough that I could hear them if I leaned close. "We can't wait too long," my dad said. "If the bank pushes again, they won't, not if we show movement. And if she refuses?" A pause. "She won't. You don't know that." Another pause, longer this time. Ryan exhaled, like he was already tired of the conversation. "She's 17. She doesn't even understand what she's signing." The words hit harder than anything else that night, not because they were loud, but because of how certain they were. My dad didn't argue. That was the part I couldn't shake. I stepped back from the window slowly, like moving too fast might make something break. 17. That's all I was to them right now. A number, a technicality, something that would change in a few weeks and make things easier. I sat back down on my bed and stared at the wall. They weren't talking about asking me. They weren't talking about explaining anything. They were talking about timing. I tried to picture the cabin in my head, the way the light hit the lake in the morning, the uneven boards on the porch that my grandfather always said he would fix one day and never did, the smell of coffee and wood and old books that never really went away. I remembered the last time I was there with my grandmother. She had stood at the sink, looking out at the water, and said something I hadn't thought about in years. "Take care of things that take care of you." At the time, I thought she meant plants or the house itself. I didn't understand what she was really saying. Downstairs, the back door opened again. Footsteps, voices moving through the house. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, listening as everything settled into silence again. They had already made their decision. They just hadn't told me all of it yet. And whatever they were planning, it wasn't something that was going to happen slowly. It was already in motion. I closed my eyes, not because I was tired, but because it was easier than trying to make sense of it all at once. Somewhere between what they thought I knew and what I was starting to understand, there was a gap. And in that gap, there was something I hadn't seen yet. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew one thing for sure. I would be stepping into something that had already been set in motion. Chapter 2. What They Didn't Know I Knew. I kept my mouth shut the next morning, and that was the first smart thing I did. At breakfast, everything looked normal, but nothing felt that way anymore. Mom stood at the stove making eggs no one really wanted. Evan talked about riding his bike later, and Dad sat with his coffee, barely touching it. Then Ryan walked in like he belonged there, like the night before hadn't changed anything. I told them I was going to the cabin. Dad looked at me a little longer than usual, then nodded. Mom said it might be good for me. No one asked why. That told me more than any answer could have. The drive to Pine Hollow felt different that morning. I had done it 100 times, but now every turn felt sharper, every mile heavier. When I pulled up, the cabin looked exactly the same, and for a second I just stood there staring at it. To them, it was an asset. To me, it was the only place that had ever felt like mine. Inside, nothing had changed. The table my grandfather built was still by the window. The porch still dipped slightly on one side. The air still smelled like wood and old books and something faintly floral that reminded me of my grandmother. I walked through each room slowly, touching things like I needed to confirm they were still real. Then I started opening drawers, not randomly, carefully. If Grandma had left something, it wouldn't be obvious. The kitchen drawers had nothing. The cabinets were exactly as I remembered. The living room shelves held the same books, the same photos. I almost convinced myself I was wrong. Then I opened the hallway closet. Behind a stack of storage bins, taped flat against the back wall, was a white envelope. My name was written across the front in my grandmother's handwriting. My hand started shaking before I even touched it. Inside was a single card. Rebecca Lawson, Estate and Trust Attorney, Portland, Oregon. That was it. No explanation, no note, just that. I sat on the floor for a minute, staring at it, trying to understand why she would leave something like this hidden. Then I thought about the night before. Clean title, deadline, transfer. It lined up too cleanly to be nothing. I stepped outside, sat on the porch, and called the number. A woman answered. I told her my name, told her about the card. There was a pause, then her voice changed just slightly. She asked if I was alone. Then she asked if I could come in that day, and before I could think too much about it, I said yes. Her last instruction stayed with me. Do not tell anyone you're coming. The drive to Portland felt unreal. Everything moved around me, but my mind kept circling the same question. What did my grandmother know that I didn't? Rebecca Lawson met me herself. She didn't waste time. She asked a few questions first, when my grandmother passed, whether anyone had talked to me about the cabin, whether I had signed anything. I said no. Then she opened a file and turned it toward me. 6 years ago, your grandparents created an irrevocable trust. The cabin, along with other assets, were transferred into it. You are the sole beneficiary. It didn't make sense at first, not because the words were complicated, but because they changed everything I thought I understood. My dad and uncle don't own it. She shook her head. Legally, they never did. She explained it in simple terms. The trust already existed. The ownership had already been recorded. The cabin was never part of what my father thought he could control. I sat there, trying to process it. Then she said something that made it all click into place. Someone has already made inquiries about the title within the last month. Ryan. I didn't even have to think about it. Rebecca didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. You turn 18 soon, she said. Once you do, you can formally take control under the trust. Until then, you need to stay quiet. Stay quiet. That part made sense. If they knew I understood, they would move faster. If they thought I didn't, they would keep walking straight into whatever they had already started. I asked her what would happen if they tried to sell before I turned 18. Her answer was simple. They would be creating a problem for themselves, not for me, for themselves. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not relief, not yet. Control. When I got back home, Ryan's truck was already in the driveway. I walked through the kitchen, quiet as I could be. Mom was at the sink. She smiled at me like everything was normal. I didn't stop. As I passed the garage, I heard their voices. We need to move this week. She won't fight it. She doesn't even understand what she's signing. I stood there for just a second, listening. Then I kept walking. Up the stairs, into my room, closing the door softly behind me. They thought I didn't know anything. They thought I was still standing where they left me, confused and easy to control. They thought they were ahead. I sat on the edge of my bed, the business card still in my hand, and let that thought settle. They were wrong. I wasn't going to fight them. Not yet. Chapter 3. The Deal They Shouldn't Have Made. Waiting turned out to be harder than knowing. Once I understood what they were trying to do, every moment in that house felt different. Conversations weren't just conversations anymore. Every word had weight. Every silence had meaning. Ryan came over almost every day that week. Sometimes he brought paperwork, sometimes just his laptop and that same confident energy, like everything was already handled. He talked about timing, about moving fast, about not missing opportunities. My dad listened more than he spoke, but when he did, his voice carried a kind of urgency I hadn't heard before. I started noticing things I would have missed before. The stack of unopened mail on the counter that slowly disappeared over 2 days. The bank envelope I saw once, half tucked under a folder before Dad quickly slid it away. The way Mom asked twice in one morning if we really needed to keep the second fridge running in the garage. It wasn't just about the cabin. They needed it. One night, I stayed up later than usual and kept my door cracked open. Ryan and Dad were in the garage again. Their voices carried more clearly this time. "We're cutting it too close," Dad said. "We're fine," Ryan replied. "They've already sent the draft agreement. We just need to get the paperwork lined up." "What about the title?" A pause. "It's not an issue," Ryan said. "Once we file the transfer, it'll clean up. I've done this before." "You're sure about that?" Another pause, shorter this time. "I'm not losing this deal, Dan." The way he said it made something click. Not just interest, not just exploring options. This was already happening. The next morning, I made an excuse to leave early and drove into town. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew where Ryan spent most of his time when he wasn't at our house. The small real estate office near the grocery store still had his name on the door, Carter Realty. It looked the same as it always had, but when I walked past the front window, I saw him inside, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. I slowed down just enough to catch a few words. Yeah, we're on track. Yeah, lake frontage, full access. No, title won't be a problem. I kept walking like I hadn't heard anything. That afternoon, he came over again. This time, he didn't bother with small talk. He spread papers across the kitchen table, pushing aside a stack of magazines like they were in his way. "We should go over this now," he said. My dad nodded and sat down across from him. Mom hovered near the sink, pretending to clean. I stayed where I was, leaning against the counter. Ryan glanced at me, then at my dad. Emily should hear this. That was new. My dad hesitated for a second, then gestured for me to sit. I pulled out a chair slowly and sat down. Ryan tapped one of the pages. "This is a preliminary agreement, nothing final, just outlines the terms." He slid it closer, but not enough for me to read everything clearly. "The buyer is Northridge Development. They've been acquiring lake properties in this area. This is a solid offer." "How much?" my dad asked. He didn't answer right away. He looked at me first, then back at my dad. 520. The number hung in the air. $520,000. Mom let out a quiet breath. "That's more than I expected," she said. Ryan nodded. "It's a good deal, especially considering how fast they want to move." I kept my expression neutral, but inside everything sharpened. Fast. Of course they wanted fast. "What do they need from us?" my dad asked. Ryan leaned back slightly. "Just clear title and signatures. Once that's in place, we're done." Clear title again. My dad looked at me. "When you turn 18, we'll need you to sign a few documents, just to finalize everything." He said it like it was nothing, like it was a formality. I didn't respond right away. Ryan smiled softer this time, like he was trying a different approach. "Look, kid, I know this is a lot, but this actually works out for you." I met his eyes. "How?" He leaned forward. "We set aside $50,000 for you, college, whatever you want, cash, no loans, no debt. That's a pretty good start." 50,000, the same number Rebecca had mentioned in passing when she talked about additional provisions my grandparents had made. They thought they were offering me something, something that was already mine. I nodded slowly. "That's generous." Ryan's smile widened just a little. "Exactly." My dad relaxed back in his chair, like the hardest part was over. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of. I felt something cold settle under that phrase. I looked down at the papers, then back up. "When do you need this done?" Ryan answered without hesitation. "As soon as possible after your birthday. We don't want to lose momentum." Momentum. I nodded again, keeping my voice steady. "Okay." That was all I said. No argument, no hesitation, just okay. Ryan gathered the papers, satisfied. "Good, that makes this a lot easier." Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed replaying everything. The number, the timeline, the way Ryan had said he wasn't losing the deal. This wasn't just about selling a property. He was already committed. Downstairs, I heard voices again, louder this time. I moved closer to the door. "We can't push it back," Ryan said. "They've got other properties lined up. If we stall, they walk. And if something goes wrong, it won't too quickly. We're too far in." Too far in. That was the part they didn't understand. They weren't just planning something, they were trapped inside it. I stepped back from the door and sat down slowly. For the first time since this started, I wasn't just reacting. I could see the shape of what was coming, and I knew exactly when it would happen. I looked at the calendar again. 2 weeks. I wasn't going to stop them from trying. I was going to let them believe they already had it, until the moment they didn't. Chapter 4. Midnight was never about celebration. The days didn't feel like days anymore. They felt like something counting down. Every conversation, every glance, every small decision carried weight. 2 weeks turned into 10 days, then 7, then 5. And the closer it got to my birthday, the more careful I had to be about everything I did. I stopped going to the garage door when they talked. I stopped asking questions. I let them believe I had already accepted whatever they were planning. Ryan came over more often, sometimes twice in the same day. He started bringing a folder with him, thicker than before, and he never left it unattended. One evening, I walked into the kitchen just as he opened it on the table. He didn't expect me. For a split second, I saw enough. A header with Northridge Development, a line with the number 520000, a section labeled Closing Timeline. Then he closed it. "Nothing you need to worry about yet," he said, smiling. I nodded like I believed him. I figured. That was the version of me they understood, the one who didn't push, the one who didn't know. 3 days before my birthday, I drove back to the cabin. I didn't tell them this time. I just left a note on the counter and took the car before anyone could ask questions. The sky was clear for once, the lake reflecting light in a way that made everything look sharper than it was. When I stepped onto the porch, the boards creaked the same way they always had, and for a moment it felt like nothing had changed. But it had. I walked inside and sat at the kitchen table, the same place where my grandfather used to fix things that didn't need fixing just to have something to do with his hands. I ran my fingers along the edge of the wood and closed my eyes. I could almost hear him, the way he would tap twice before standing up, the way he would say, "We'll take care of it," whatever it was. Take care of things that take care of you. I opened my eyes and looked around. They thought this place was waiting to be sold. They had no idea it had already been protected. I stayed there longer than I meant to, not thinking, not planning, just sitting in the quiet, letting everything settle into place. By the time I drove back, it was almost dark. Ryan's truck was already in the driveway. Inside, the tension was thicker than usual. Mom was at the sink again, but this time she wasn't pretending. She looked tired. Dad stood near the counter, arms crossed. Ryan sat at the table, the folder in front of him. All three of them looked up when I walked in. "Where were you?" Dad asked. "At the cabin." He held my gaze for a second. "You should have told us." I shrugged. "I left a note." Ryan leaned back in his chair. "Good to see it one last time." The words were casual, but they landed hard. I walked past him and set my keys down. "It's not gone yet." Ryan smiled, but there was something tighter behind it now. "Everything moves forward, Emily. That's how life works." I didn't answer. That night, I barely slept. The next day was quiet, too quiet. No visits from Ryan, no conversations in the garage, just a kind of stillness that felt like the calm before something broke. By the time evening came, I understood why. My birthday dinner. Mom had made more effort than usual, real food, not something quick or distracted. A cake sat on the counter, already lit when I walked into the kitchen. Evan smiled when he saw me. "Happy birthday." Dad nodded. 18. Ryan was already there. Of course he was. We sat down, went through the motions, small talk, forced smiles, the kind of normal that feels like a performance when everyone knows something else is coming. Halfway through dinner, Ryan set his fork down. "We should talk after this." No one argued. The rest of the meal went by in silence. When it was over, Mom cleared the plates quickly. Evan was sent upstairs without explanation. Then Ryan opened the folder. He slid a set of papers across the table toward me. "This is what we discussed," he said, just formalizing everything. Dad leaned forward. It's straightforward. We've already gone over the details. I looked down at the pages. Names, numbers, legal language that blurred together if you didn't know what you were looking for. But I did. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Ryan blinked just slightly. "You don't have to rush," he said. "You can look it over." I met his eyes. "I trust you." The lie came out easier than I expected. For a second, no one spoke. Then Ryan nodded. "All right." He tapped a spot near the bottom of the page. "Here and here." Dad exhaled like something had just been resolved. I picked up the pen. Then I set it down again. "Can I take a minute?" Ryan leaned back. "Of course." I stood up and walked out of the kitchen. No one followed me. Upstairs, I closed my door and pulled my phone out. 11:52 p.m. I sat on the edge of my bed, the papers still in my hand, and dialed Rebecca. She answered on the second ring. "Are you ready?" "Yes." "Stay where you are. We'll do this together." I put the phone on speaker and set it on the bed. "Walk me through it," I said. Her voice stayed calm, steady. "You are not signing anything they gave you. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good. In 8 minutes, you turn 18. At that point, you will sign the acceptance document I emailed you earlier, not before." I opened my email and found it, a single document, my name already filled in. "Once you sign, I will file first thing in the morning. The trust is already recorded. This step activates your control." I glanced at the clock. 11:57 p.m. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. 11:59 p.m. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. 0000. The numbers changed. I exhaled without realizing I had been holding my breath. "You're 18, Rebecca said. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake this time. I signed my name. Slow, clear, deliberate. When I finished, I stared at it for a second. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a line had just been drawn. "Done," I said. "Good," Rebecca replied. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we move." I ended the call and sat there for a moment longer. Then I folded the paper, set it on my desk, and stood up. Downstairs, they were still waiting. I opened my door, walked down the stairs, and stepped back into the kitchen. Ryan looked up immediately. "Ready?" I picked up the pen again. "Yeah." And for the first time since this started, I knew exactly what was going to happen next. Chapter 5. The day everything fell apart. He thought I was finally about to do what he wanted. I walked back into the kitchen slowly, the pen still in my hand, and took my seat at the table. The papers were where he had left them, angled toward me like the whole night had been arranged around that exact moment. Dad stood near the counter, arms folded, trying too hard to look calm. Mom had stopped pretending to clean. Even she was watching me now. Ryan tapped the page again. Right there. Then the second page after that. I looked down at the documents, then back up at him. "I just want to be clear on something first." He smiled, patient in the way people do when they think they've already won. "What is it?" "Once I sign, the cabin is sold." He gave a small shrug. "Once title is finalized, yes, then everything moves quickly." "And my 50,000? "You'll have it. We all keep our end of the deal." I nodded slowly, like I was thinking it through. Dad finally spoke. "Emily, this doesn't need to be harder than it is." That was the sentence that almost made me laugh. Harder than it is, as if they hadn't turned my grandmother's death into a countdown. I set the pen down. "I'm tired. I'll do it in the morning." The room changed instantly. Ryan straightened. "No, we should finish it tonight." I looked at him, calm enough to make him uncomfortable. "Why?" "Because there's no reason to wait." There it was. Not concern, not family, urgency. Dad stepped in then, sharper than before. Your uncle is trying to make this easy. Don't start something over nothing. I met his eyes. It's not nothing if you need it done before morning. For 1 second, no one said anything. Then Mom tried to smooth it over, her voice softer than the rest of her. Honey, everyone's exhausted. Just sign tomorrow after breakfast if that makes you feel better. Ryan looked at her, irritated, but he couldn't fight that without showing too much. Fine, he said. Morning. I stood up, took the papers with me before he could stop me, and went upstairs. I didn't sleep. At 7:14 the next morning, Rebecca texted me one line. On my way. I sat on the edge of my bed, fully dressed, staring at my phone while the house woke up around me. Water running in my parents' bathroom. Evan dragging his feet down the hall. Cabinets opening in the kitchen. Ordinary sounds. Last ordinary morning. By 7:45, Ryan was already there. I heard his truck before I heard his voice. He came in through the kitchen like he lived there, carrying the same leather folder, moving faster than usual. We should leave by 8:30, he said. Recorder opens at 9, but I want to be there early. Dad answered from the kitchen. She still has the papers. Then get her down here. I picked them up and walked downstairs before he could come for me. All three of them turned when I entered. Ryan held out his hand. You ready? I handed him the papers. I changed my mind. He frowned. About what? About signing anything. Silence. Dad's face hardened first. Emily? I kept my voice level. I'm not signing over the cabin. Ryan gave a quick laugh, the kind people make when they think denial will fix reality. That's not how this works. Actually, I said, I think it is. He took a step toward me and his voice dropped. You don't understand what you're doing. I understood perfectly, and that was the problem. Dad slammed his palm against the counter hard enough to make Evan jump. Enough. You are not going to throw this family into chaos over a vacation property. Vacation property? I looked at him and realized he had to reduce it to that. If he admitted what it really was, what it had meant to his parents, what it had meant to me, then none of this would sound defensible. It isn't yours to sell, I said. Ryan stopped moving. What did you just say? I felt my heartbeat in my throat, but my voice stayed steady. The cabin isn't yours. It never was. Mom went pale first. Dad stared at me like I had started speaking a different language. Ryan recovered fastest. Who have you been talking to? I didn't answer him. He took another step closer, and his voice dropped. Emily, if this is some kind of misunderstanding, now would be the time to stop making it worse. A knock at the front door cut through the room. No one moved. Then the knock came again, firmer this time. I knew before I opened it. Rebecca stood on the porch in charcoal coat, leather briefcase in one hand, expression calm enough to be almost kind. She looked past me into the house and seemed to understand everything in one glance. Good morning, Emily. Ryan was behind me before I could answer. Who is this? Rebecca stepped inside without waiting to be invited. Rebecca Lawson, counsel for the Carter Family Irrevocable Trust. No one said a word. She turned slightly toward Ryan and Dad. And I'd strongly advise both of you to sit down before this gets more expensive than it already is. Ryan actually laughed. What trust? Rebecca opened her briefcase, removed a set of documents, and placed them on the kitchen table with deliberate care. The Pine Hollow cabin, along with associated financial assets, was transferred into an irrevocable trust 6 years ago by Arthur and Ruth Carter. The trust was recorded at the time. Emily Carter is the sole beneficiary. As of 12:01 this morning, she has formally accepted control under the trust. Dad looked at the papers but didn't touch them. That's not possible. Rebecca's tone stayed neutral. It is not only possible, Mr. Carter, it is already a matter of record. Ryan grabbed the first page and scanned it. I watched the color drain from his face in stages. No, that's not right. Rebecca reached into her briefcase again and pulled out one more document. and 1 hour ago, I recorded notice protecting the trust's interest in the property. Any attempt to transfer, encumber, or sell the cabin without standing will fail on title review. If papers have already been prepared, I suggest they not be filed. Ryan looked up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Filed where? Rebecca met his eyes. You tell me. He was gone before anyone could stop him. Out the front door, truck starting so hard the engine coughed before catching. Dad didn't follow. He just stood there, one hand on the counter, staring at the trust documents like they had betrayed him personally. Mom sat down slowly, as if her knees had given out without warning. I thought of every time she had said practical, every time she had called this reality, every time she had looked at me like I was too young to understand what was happening. Rebecca turned to me. It's done. The words should have felt triumphant. They didn't. They felt final. Ryan called 43 minutes later. Dad answered on speaker without meaning to. His hands were shaking. What happened? Ryan's voice came through ragged and too loud. They kicked it back. Chain of title doesn't match. The clerk flagged the trust notice. Northridge's attorney is asking questions. Dad's jaw tightened. What does that mean? It means the deal is dead unless this gets fixed now. Dad laughed once, short and humorless. Fixed how? Ryan didn't answer right away. Then, in a lower voice, he said he might have exposure, that Northridge could come after him from this representation, that their attorney wanted copies of everything he'd given them. Everything. Dad looked at Rebecca then, really looked at her. Can we challenge this? You can try, she said. It would fail, and it would cost you more than this house is worth. The kitchen went quiet after that. Not dramatic quiet, not screaming, not collapsing, the kind of quiet that comes when everyone in the room knows the truth has already settled, and there's nowhere left to move it. Over the next 3 weeks, the consequences arrived exactly the way Rebecca said they would. Northridge filed a civil claim against Ryan for breach and misrepresentation. His brokerage suspended him pending review. The deal he had treated like a certainty collapsed into the kind of paperwork that eats people alive. Dad sold the business by the end of the month, not for enough to feel dignified, but enough to keep the bank from taking more than it already had. Mom got a part-time job at a pharmacy in Springfield. She told people she wanted to get out of the house. No one believed that, but no one said otherwise. I moved into the cabin 2 weeks after graduation. The first night there alone, I sat on the porch with the lake turning gold in front of me and read the letter Rebecca had finally given me from my grandfather. He wrote that some things had value and some things were valuable, and most people spent their whole lives learning the difference too late. He wrote that he didn't choose me because I was stronger than the rest of them. He chose me because I noticed what needed fixing before I asked what anything was worth. I cried then, quietly, with the letter in my lap and the porch boards warm from the day's heat. Not because I had won, because I finally understood that the people who loved me most had seen this coming long before I did, and instead of warning me with words, they protected me with something stronger: paper, time, planning, love that knew better than to arrive empty-handed. By August, I was enrolled at Lane Community College with enough from the Trust's education fund to cover tuition without touching a loan. The cabin was still mine. The lake was still there. The mornings were mine in a way they had never been before. Dad called once in September. He asked how the roof was holding up, as if that was the bridge he could build. I told him the flashing near the chimney needed replacing before winter. He said, okay, and neither of us said what we actually meant. Maybe one day we will. Maybe we won't. Some losses don't end in fire. They end in distance. But peace has its own shape. Mine looks like coffee on the porch, pine in the air, and knowing no one gets to decide for me again. If you've ever had someone mistake your silence for weakness, I hope this story stays with you. And if there's one place, one promise, or one piece of yourself you would protect no matter what, I'd love to know what it is. Stay with me for the next story, because sometimes the people who underestimate you are the ones who teach you exactly how strong you are.